The thunder of hooves echoed through the cold morning mist, pounding like war drums down the narrow mountain pass. Dust swirled red. A lone rider, shoulders heavy with exhaustion, crested the ridge and suddenly saw it, a impossibly green valley unfolding below, too peaceful, too perfect, and far too dangerous. The wind carried the faint scent of distant smoke. On the porch of the weathered white farmhouse in the center of the valley, 3 women stood motionless like stone sentinels, their eyes locked on the stranger riding toward them. No words, no smiles, only the soft, unmistakable click of a pistol being cocked behind someone's back. A contract had already been signed, a blood debt transferred, and Ridgefall Valley, for the first time in years, whispered one deadly question. Was the man riding down into this valley their last hope, or simply the next victim? 3 days. That's how long Cord Macklin had been in the saddle when the valley finally opened up before him. 3 days of nothing but dust and wind, and the kind of silence that gets inside a man's head and starts rearranging furniture. 3 days of canyon walls pressing in close enough to block the sun, dry creek beds, abandoned homesteads with doors hanging open like mouths frozen mid-scream. 3 days of talking to his horse because his horse, at least, didn't ask questions he couldn't answer. The horse's name was Reckoning. Cord had named him that after the war. Seemed fitting at the time. Seemed even more fitting now. He stopped at the ridge and looked down. The valley was green. Genuinely, impossibly green. Mountains, on 3 sides rising like walls, built by something older than men and their wars. A creek cutting silver through the western edge. Grass that rolled and dipped toward stands of pine and aspen. Fields showing the careful geometry of human hands. A farmhouse sitting square in the center. White paint weathered to the color of old bone. A barn standing true. Corrals with good fence posts, real. It was actually real. Cord had spent 5 years not believing in things. Not believing in fresh starts. Not believing in luck. Not believing in the kind of land deal that gets offered to strangers in Denver saloons. But he'd checked those papers 6 ways to Sunday. Surveyor's map. Chain of title going back 12 years. Everything in order. Everything legal. He'd paid $400. Every dollar he'd scraped together in 5 years of working other men's land, while sleeping in bunk citrisons that smelled like regret and old tobacco. He allowed himself exactly 1 moment of something that might have been hope. Then he saw them, 3 women, standing on the front porch, still as fence posts, watching him come down the ridge like they'd been expecting him, which, it turned out, they had. Cord Macklin was 35 years old, which meant he was old enough to have seen things that aged a man past his years. Young enough that some stubborn, stupid part of him still believed in the possibility of peace. He'd been born in the hill country of Kentucky, where his father had taught him to read weather by the smell of wind before he taught him to read words on a page. Where silence wasn't empty. Where a man could go 3 days without seeing another soul and feel full instead of hollow. He'd been that kind of man once, then came the war, 4 years of it. Antietam first, where the creek ran red and men fell in rows like wheat before a scythe. Then Spotsylvania, which was worse. Then Petersburg, which was different worse. The kind of worse that doesn't make a sound. The kind that just settles into your bones and stays there. Quiet and permanent, like water, finding the lowest point. He didn't talk about the war, not to anyone, not ever. There was a boy at Spotsylvania, 19 years old. Cord had seen him go down in the mud, 20 feet away, and he'd had 2 seconds to make a choice, and he'd made the wrong one, and he'd been making the right ones ever since, trying to balance some invisible ledger that would never balance because that boy was still in the mud, and Cord was still here. So, mountains. Mountains were his answer. Mountains and distance and land that belonged to nobody, except the man who worked it. No orders, no officers, no one looking at him, with the particular expression people get when they know you've seen things you shouldn't have seen, and they don't know what to do with that knowledge, and neither do you. Just land. Just reckoning and the trail and the smell of pine and the chance, the possibility, the fragile, stupid hope of something new. 24,400. Everything. He'd met Silas Crane in a Denver saloon 6 weeks ago. Crane had been sitting at the bar, like a man who'd been sitting at that particular bar his entire tart life, which should have been the first warning sign. Cord had been nursing a whiskey he didn't really want when Crane had slid down 2 stools and smiled the smile of a man who sold things for a living. "You look like a man who wants land," Crane had said. Cord had looked at him. "Most men want land. Not like this." Crane had set the deed on the bar. Ridgefall Valley. Mountain country. Creek-fed. Good soil. 300 acres of the best grazing land in the territory. Cord had picked up the deed. Examined it. Examined the deed again. The paper was real. The surveyor's name was a real name. The county seal was genuine. He'd asked 3 different questions designed to catch a liar in a lie, and Crane had answered all 3 without hesitation and without inconsistency. "Why are you selling?" Cord had asked. "Family in California." Crane had said, easy as breathing. "Opportunity there. But this land," he'd tapped the deed with one finger. "This land will make you rich if you work it right." Cord had been suspicious. He'd been suspicious the whole time he was counting out $400 in bills and coin. He'd been suspicious when Crane shook his hand and said, "Smooth as river water. She's all yours, mountain man." He was still suspicious when he rode out of Denver 3 days later, and yet here he was, riding down into a valley that was exactly as beautiful as advertised. Which was the thing about good liars. They didn't lie about everything, just the parts that mattered. The 3 women didn't move as he rode into the yard. Cord brought reckoning to a stop 20 feet from the porch, close enough to talk, far enough to run, if running became necessary. His hand drifted to the stock of his rifle. Not a threat, just habit. The same way a man checks his pockets when he walks into an unfamiliar room. The woman in the middle was tall. Taller than most men Cord knew. Broad-shouldered, the kind of broad that comes from years of actual work rather than the performative kind. Dark hair pulled back from a face that was handsome, the way granite is handsome. Strong, permanent. "Not asking for your opinion about it," she stepped forward. The porch boards groaned. "Cord Macklin," she said. "Not a question. That's right." He kept his voice level. "And you are Nessa Calloway." She gestured left. "Fern Whitlock, then right. Ada Voss." He looked at all 3. They looked back. Nobody blinked. "You've been expecting me," he said. "We have." "Why?" Nessa reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a folded document, held it out toward him. "Because Silas Crane told us you were coming. And because you're going to want to read this." He didn't move for a moment. Sat on reckoning and looked at the paper the way you look at a snake that hasn't struck yet but hasn't decided not to. Then he dismounted. Took the paper. Opened it. Write it. Write it again. "Any transfer of property ownership shall include transfer of all partnership commitments herein described, including but not limited to shared residence, shared labor, shared profits, and shared companionship between all parties involved in said partnership." He read that last part a 3rd time ficum. Should companionship, the afternoon got very quiet. "This can't be legal," he said. Nessa's expression didn't shift. "We're 3 days from the nearest sheriff. 4 days from any court that might care about the difference between legal and not legal." He looked up from the paper. "I bought land, not people." She met his eyes without flinching. "Neither did we." He stopped that answer. Those 3 words. He hadn't expected those 3 words. He'd expected threats, manipulation, the desperate maneuvers of people backed into a corner. He'd been prepared for all of that. He had not been prepared for 3 words that were so precisely, so undeniably true that they knocked the anger sideways and left something else in its place. Something he didn't have a name for yet. "There's more," Nessa said. Of course there was. "Come inside." The kitchen was clean. That was the first thing he noticed. Not clean the way things get when company's coming. Clean the way things get when people live carefully. Swept floor, whitewashed walls. A braided rug that had been mended at one edge. A table with 4 chairs that didn't quite match but all stood level. 4 chairs. He noticed that too. Fern Whitlock set a mug of coffee in front of him, without asking if he wanted it. He drank it because his hands needed something to do, and because it smelled like kind of coffee that meant business. Nessa spread papers across the table, low on documents. A contract with the name Harlan Dodd at the top, in letters that meant to impress. Numbers that did not impress so much as they horrified. $7,200, Cord said, yes. To a man named Harlan Dodd, yes. Who has, he scanned the document, first right to all production from this property, cattle, crops, everything, yes. He set the papers down, looked at the 3 women arranged around the table. Fern watching him with careful eyes. Ada Voss standing near the window with her arms crossed, and one hand resting on the handle of a knife at her belt like she'd forgotten it was there, which he doubted. And Nessa sitting across from him, straight-backed, not apologizing, not softening it, just presenting the facts because the facts were what they were. "Walk me through how this happened," he said. Nessa was quiet for a moment. Then, "Silas Crane came to this valley 18 months ago, with a deed and a plan, and a smile that made you believe you were the only person in the room worth talking to." A pause. "He was good at that. He's good at a lot of things." Cord said, "He told me we'd be partners. Equal shares. He'd bring the capital, we'd bring the labor, and in 5 years we'd something worth leaving to our children." Her jaw tightened. "He told me I was the first woman he'd met who understood what real work meant." Cord said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would help. "He borrowed against the property 6 months in," Nessa continued. "Said it was temporary. Said the returns from the first cattle sale would cover it. Signed our names to the loan documents without telling us the terms. We found out when Harlan Dodd's men came to take inventory, and Silas, gone. The word came out flat and final. Took every cent from the cattle sale. Left us with the debt and that." She nodded at the partnership contract, which ensures that whoever bought this property next, his obligations. Cord looked at the contract again. "Yes. From the beginning. We figured that out about 2 days after he left." He picked up his coffee. Drank, set it down. "How much time do we have?" 4 weeks, 28 days, $7,200. 28 days. 3 women who'd been systematically deceived by a man who'd apparently made a career out of exactly this kind of systematic deception. Cord stood up. "Show me the farm." Nessa raised an eyebrow. "Show me what I bought," he said. "All of it." Every inch. She stood, grabbed her hat from the peg by the door. "All right." She opened the door. He followed. The irrigation system stopped him cold. He'd walked past fields his whole life. He understood the work of them, the logic of them. But this was something else. Channels cut by hand. Running from the creek to 3 separate fields in a network that followed the grade of the land like it had always been there. Like the land had been waiting for someone to notice what it was asking for. Stone-lined, clay-sealed, built to outlast the people who built it. "Who designed this?" he said. "Fern," Nessa said. He crouched beside the main channel. Ran his finger along the stone. Each piece fitted precisely to its neighbor. No gaps, no settling. "Her father was a blacksmith," Nessa said. "Taught her how systems work, how water moves. How to build something that lasts instead of something that just looks like it lasts." Cord stood. Looked at the fields the channels fed. Green and straight and deliberately tended. "Silas's contribution to this system," he said. "He complained about it for 4 months, Nessa said. Said it was too much work for too little return. Said the creek would be enough in the wet season, and we should just let the field go dry in August. You can't let fields go dry in August. That's what Fern told him." He looked at Nessa. She looked back. Something moved between them that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. They walked to the cattle pastures. 35 head of mixed breeds, every one of them healthy. Grass that showed careful rotational management. A pasture that had been given time to rest and come back stronger. "These are your cattle," he said. "You bought them." "With our own money," Nessa said. "Everything we'd saved before Silas arrived. He promised to match it, buy another 30 head. Build a real operation." A pause. He spent it at a gambling table in Milford instead. Cord counted the cattle, estimated their value. $2,800, maybe, at fair market prices. Which was not the same as what they'd get if they were desperate, and everyone knew it. They walked the wheat fields. 2 full acres. The grain just beginning to head out. Green and dense and full of promise. That was approximately 7 weeks from being realized. 7 weeks, 3 weeks past the deadline. "Harlan won't wait for the harvest," Cord said. "No," Nessa agreed. "He won't." They walked back toward the farmhouse in silence. Cord's mind was already running numbers. Cattle at fair price, wheat if they could sell it early and find someone other than Harlan's buyers. The gold Ada had mentioned, though he hadn't seen that yet, the math didn't add up. He knew it didn't add up. He was doing it anyway. Because not doing the math felt like giving up, and giving up was not something his body seemed to know how to do, even when his brain thought it might be reasonable. He stopped at the barn. Looked around, everything in its place. Tools hung on proper pegs, tack in order, hay stacked, with a care that meant these women had done this work 1,000 times and found 1,000 small ways to do it better each time. "Fern's system isn't just the irrigation," he said. "No," Nessa said. She organized everything. Feed schedules, rotation maps. She knows exactly how much this needs not to survive winter, and exactly how much we have, and exactly how much the gap is. What's the gap? Before we figured out we were bankrupt? A pause. There wasn't one. This farm was turning a profit by month 8. Not much, but real. He thought about that. Month 8, meaning they'd built something that actually worked. Meaning the proof of concept was solid. Meaning everything Silas Crane had walked away from was a going concern that would have paid for itself inside of 3 years. "He left a working farm," Cord said. "He left," Nessa said simply. The farm was working regardless. That evening, Cord did something he hadn't planned on doing. He didn't leave. He'd been thinking about leaving. Sitting on the edge of the bed in the guest room they'd given him, his saddlebags on the floor, reckoning in a stall that smelled like good hay and care. $40 left in his pocket. The deed to a property that was worth exactly nothing, as long as Harlan Dodd's name was on a loan document. Connected to it, he could ride back to Denver, find work, start over. He'd started over before. After the war, standing in a Virginia field with nothing but his rifle and the clothes he'd been wearing for 6 months. After his mother died. After every friend he'd made in the army ended up as a name on a list somewhere. He knew how to start over. He was very good at it, except he was so tired of being good at it. There was a sound downstairs. Voices. Fern saying something quiet. Ada's sharp laugh, Nessa's low response. The sound of a home that had been built by people who needed each other, who'd learned to make space for each other's sharp edges and quiet griefs and stubborn, particular ways of doing things. Cord sat on the edge of the bed and listened and felt something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten it had a name. Loneliness. Not the comfortable kind. Not the chosen kind he'd been cultivating for 5 years like a crop. The other kind. The kind that isn't about being alone but about being outside. A warmth you can see through the window. He sat with it. Then he heard something else, a sound from below. Not voices. A drawer opening. Then careful, deliberate footsteps to the barn. Then a board lifting. Then stillness. He was down the stairs before he'd decided to move. The barn was lit by a single lantern. Nessa was crouched by the far wall, one hand on a loose floorboard she'd already pulled up. Fern stood 2 feet back, arms folded, watching. Ada was by the door, and her hand was on her knife, and she was watching Cord like she was still deciding something out about him. On the floor between Nessa's knees, lifted out of the space beneath the boards, a tin box, and next to it, a leather pouch, and next to that, a stack of papers with Silas Crane's handwriting on them. Cord looked at Nessa. Nessa looked at Cord. "We found this 3 days ago," she said. "We weren't going to show you. We didn't know you yet." And now, she looked at him for a long moment, measuring. The same measuring look she'd given him in the yard when he'd arrived, except different now. Less defensive. More something else. "And now you stayed for dinner," she said. "And you asked to see the farm. And you didn't run when I told you the number." A pause. "And you noticed the irrigation system. Hard to miss. Silas was here 18 months and never noticed it." She picked up the papers, held them out. "These were under the floor. He left them. We think on purpose." Cord took the papers. He stood in the lantern light and read them and felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the night air. 8 names, 8 women. In 8 different territories. Not random names. Not a list. Notes. Strategy. Careful, detailed observations about each woman's particular vulnerabilities. What she wanted, what she feared, what she would believe if you said it at the right moment, in the right tone of voice. Widow, desperate for legitimacy. Respond to language of partnership and respect. Isolated, respond to language of family. Don't push, let her come to the conclusion herself. Strong, independent, suspicious. Challenge her directly. She responds to someone who doesn't back down. Cord looked at Nessa. She was watching him read. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were doing something complicated. "He knew exactly how to approach each of you," Cord said. "Yes." He wrote it down. "Yes, which means he'd done this before," Nessa said. "At least 8 times that we know of. Probably more. This is what he does. This is the business." The room was very quiet. Cord put the papers down on top of the tin box. He thought about Silas Crane in that Denver saloon. Easy and smooth and exactly calibrated. To seem like nothing was calibrated at all. He thought about the deed and the surveyor's map and the county seal and all the legitimate things wrapped around something rotten at the center. He thought about a man who had reduced 8 women, probably more, to notes in a system, observations, tactics. He thought about the boy in the mud at Spotsylvania, about wrong choices, about the ledger that never balanced. "What's in the tin?" he said. "Gold dust," Fern said. It was the first time she'd spoken since they came in from the farm tour. Her voice was quieter than Nessa's, more considered, like she only spoke when she was sure of what she was going to say. Silas found a small deposit in the hills north of the valley. He extracted what he could easily get. Then he stopped. Said it wasn't worth the effort. "How much is left?" "We don't know exactly." Fern looked at tin. He didn't dig deep. Didn't follow the vein. He was looking for easy money, and when it stopped being easy, he moved on. Cord picked up the tin. It was lighter than he'd hoped. "Heavier than nothing, North Hills," he said. "How far?" 2 hours on horseback." He set the tin down. He picked up the papers again, looked at Nessa's name and Silas Crane's careful handwriting. Strong, independent, suspicious, challenge her directly. She responds to someone who doesn't back down. He put the papers back in the box, folded his arms, looked at 3 women who'd been turned into strategy notes by a man who'd spent 18 months in their home, eating their food and sleeping under their roof, and smiling at them with a smile he'd designed specifically for each of them. "Tomorrow," he said. All 3 looked at him. "Tomorrow we ride north, and I look at that deposit." He looked at each of them in turn. "And when I come back, we sit down with every number on every piece of paper in this house, and we figure out what we actually have and what we actually need, and what the gap is." He picked up the lantern from the floor. "Tonight, I'm going back to bed." He walked toward the barn door, stopped, didn't turn around. "I've seen enough bad men win," he said. "I'm not leaving so another one gets to." He walked out. Behind him, in the lantern-lit barn, 3 women looked at each other in the silence he left behind. He didn't sleep well. He hadn't slept well since 1863. This was not new information. But that night was worse than usual, which said something. Because usual was already not great. He lay on the narrow bed in the guest room and stared at the ceiling, and the ceiling didn't have anything useful to tell him. The sounds of the house settled around him. reckoning moving in his stall below, an owl somewhere in the pines. The creek, faint and steady, doing what creekers do regardless of the troubles of the people who live near them. He thought about the boy at Spotsylvania. He thought about $7,200. He thought about Silas Crane writing N, strong, independent, suspicious in his careful handwriting, and deciding what approach would work best on a woman he was planning to use and discard. He thought about Nessa's face when he'd looked up from that paper. The way she'd been watching him read. Not ashamed, not broken, just waiting to see what he'd do with the information. That was the thing. She wasn't broken. None of them were. Fern with her irrigation system and her quiet economy of words. Ada with her knife and her absolute refusal to trust just because they said something reasonable. Nessa with her granite face and the 3 words that had knocked him sideways the moment she'd said them. Neither did we. There was a sound in the hallway, then a soft knock. Heath sat up. Come in. The door opened. Fern Whitlock. Still dressed. A lamp in one hand. She looked at the chair by the window and crossed to it and sat down without asking, which told him something about the kind of person she was. She set the lamp on the windowsill. I couldn't sleep either, she said. No, I do this sometimes, she said. When I'm worried, I walk around. Nessa says I should try staying still, but staying still doesn't help. My brain needs my feet moving. Does it help? Sometimes. She looked out the window at the dark valley. I wanted to tell you something. He waited. The irrigation system, she said. Silas wanted me to stop. Said it was too much work. Said I was wasting time that should go to the cattle or the wheat. She was more quiet for a moment. I kept going anyway. Worked on it at night sometimes. Before anyone was up in the morning, a pause. He never noticed. Cord said nothing. That's the thing about Silas, Fern said. He noticed what he was looking for. He wasn't looking for what I was doing, so he didn't see it. She looked at Cord. You noticed it first thing, hard not to. Silas was here 18 months, she said again. Like the number meant something. Like it was still surprising her. He wasn't looking at the land, Cord said. He was looking at what he could take from it. Fern was quiet. Then, I know this isn't fair to you, what he did, using you this way. He didn't use me, Cord said. He tried to, there's a difference. She looked at him. He thought he was setting a trap and walking away, Cord said. He didn't account for the possibility that whoever bought this land might decide to fight instead of fold. Most people fold, I'm not most people. He wasn't saying it to sound impressive. Just stating a fact the way you'd state the weather. The war, he said, and then stopped, and then said the thing he almost never said. I left a boy in the mud at Spotsylvania, 19 years old. I've been trying to make that right ever since, and I know I can't, but I keep trying anyway. He looked at his hands. Point is, I know how to keep going when everything says stop. Fern was very still. Why are you telling me that? She said. Because you told me about the irrigation system, he said. Seemed like a fair trade. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood, picked up her lamp, moved toward the door. Ada doesn't trust you, she said, from the doorway. I know. She has reasons, imagine she does. They're good reasons, Fern said. I imagine they are. She looked at him one more time. Then, the vein in the North Hills goes deeper than Silas dug. I could tell by the color of the rock. He stopped at the surface because he was lazy. A pause. He was always lazy, she left Teft. He sat in the dark for a while after she went. Then he lay back down and looked at the ceiling and thought about the math, and the gold, and the 28 days, and the boy at Spotsylvania, and 3 women who'd been turned into strategy notes, and a farm that worked because people had put their hands into it and refused to let it not work. The ceiling still didn't have anything useful to say, but the house felt different than it had an hour ago. Less like a trap. More like something else. He wasn't sure yet what to call it. He'd figure it out. He was good at figuring things out when he had enough information. And right now, for the first time in 5 years of careful solitude, he was somewhere that seemed to have more information than he'd bargained for. More everything than he'd bargained for. Morning came the way. Mornings come when you haven't slept. All at once. Without mercy. Cord was dressed before the roosters finished making their point about it. Downstairs before the stove was fully lit. Standing in the kitchen doorway, watching Nessa crack eggs into the cast-iron pan, with the efficiency of a woman who'd done it 10,000 times and expected to do it 10,000 more. She didn't turn around. "You stayed," she said. "I stayed." "I thought you might not. I thought about it." She turned then. Looked at him across the kitchen. He pulled out a chair and sat down. "I found something in the barn last night," he said. She went still. "After you three went to bed," he said. "I went back out to check on reckoning, and I found something under the floor near the southeast wall." He put the papers on the table. Not the tin box, which was still in the barn. Just the papers. The ones with the names and the notes and Silas Crane's careful, damning handwriting. Nessa looked at the papers. Then at Cord. "You went back for them," she said. "I went back to think," he said. The papers were already there. She sat down slowly, across from him. "The eggs forgotten in the pan. You read them." "Yes." She looked at the papers on the table between them. She didn't pick them up. She already knew what was in them. "There are 8 names," Cord said. "We found 9, Nessa said quietly. The 9th page was torn. We couldn't read the name 9. Silas Crane had done this at least 9 times. Maybe more. Probably more. The pages they'd found were the ones he hadn't bothered to take with him, because he'd already moved on to the next name on a list they'd never seen. "I'm going to need everything," Cord said. "Every paper in this house related to the debt or the farm or Silas Crane. Every number. Every clause." He looked at her steadily. "And I need you to tell me there aren't any more surprises. Because I can work with problems. What I can't work with is finding out there's a problem I didn't know about when there's no time left to fix it." Nessa looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "There's the gold. I know about the gold. Fern told me." A flicker of something crossed her face. She did. What else? She was quiet. "Nessa." She looked at the table, then back at him. Her jaw was set, but her eyes were doing the complicated thing again. The thing he was starting to recognize as what happened when she was deciding whether to trust someone. "The gold is in a region that's self-described to Harlan Dodd," she said. "We don't know exactly how much Harlan knows about it. Or whether he's already sent men up there." Cord sat back. That was new. That was a problem that didn't have a solution yet. "All right," he said. "All right? All right," he said again. "We need to see the deposit before anyone else gets there. Today. This morning," he stood. "Is there coffee?" Fern appeared from the direction of the back door, a bucket of eggs in each hand, in time to hear the last sentence. "There's always coffee," she said, setting the buckets down. "You learn that first in this house, or you learn it the hard way." He almost smiled. Almost. Ada came in last. Stopped in the doorway when she saw the papers on the table. Looked at them. Looked at Cord. Her hand moved to her knife. Not drawing it. Just checking. Making sure it was still there. "He found the papers," Nessa said. Ada looked at Cord with eyes that were green and flat and absolutely unsentimental. "And he's still here," Nessa said. Ada looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she crossed to the stove and poured herself coffee, without offering to pour any for anyone else, which was, Cord was, beginning to understand not rudeness, but a particular kind of signal. She only offered things she meant. "The North Hills," he said to the room. "All 4 of us. How soon can we ride?" They rode out an hour later, 4 of them. Single file through the lower pasture, then up into the foothills where the grass gave way to scrub, and the scrub gave way to pine, and the pine gave way to the kind of steep, rocky country that mountain men like Cord had spent their whole lives reading. He read it now, the geology of it, the way the rock strata ran, the color of the stone where it had been broken or eroded. There were signs he knew how to see, and signs he'd never been taught but recognized anyway. The way you recognize a word in a foreign language that shares a root with one you already know. They came to the canyon an hour and 40 minutes in, a narrow cut in the hillside. Small creek running through the bottom. Barely a creek. More of an argument between stones about whether water was going to happen here or not. There, Fern said, pointing. A section of the canyon wall where the rock changed color, where someone had dug. Not deep, barely scratched. The kind of digging you do when you're in a hurry and looking for the easy part and stopping the moment. It stops being easy, Cord. Dismounted. Crouched by the creek, scooped a handful of gravel, swirled it in his palm. Gold, not much, but there, real. Catching the morning light in a way that couldn't be mistaken for anything else, he stood up, looked at the canyon wall, looked at the angle of the rock, looked at the creek and where it bent, and what that told him about where the heavy material was settling. He looked at Fern. The vein, he said. Where do you think it goes? She pointed. Not where Silas had been digging, 15 feet to the left and 3 feet deeper, into the solid face of the canyon wall. There, she said. The surface color is different. The matrix rock has changed. Whatever Silas found was just where the vein was close enough out to the surface to fall into the creek. The main deposit is in there. Cord looked at the wall, looked at his hands, looked at the 4 weeks they had. It's not enough on its own, he said. Not a question, just thinking out loud. No, Fern said. Even if we work it hard, even if the vein is richer than I think, it won't cover the gap alone. But combined with the cattle and the wheat, maybe, Fern said. If the wheat sells high, if we find a buyer who isn't Harlan, if nothing else goes wrong. He looked at her. She looked back at him with those careful, considering eyes. That's a lot of ifs, he said. Yes, she said, but they're possible. Ifs, yes, she said. They're possible, he nodded. Behind him, he heard Ada make a sound that might, in another woman, have been the beginning of hope, and was in Ada Voss. Something more like a reluctant acknowledgement that hope had not yet been definitively ruled out. Nessa said nothing. But she was looking at the canyon wall with the expression of a woman who has decided something and is not going to say what it is until she's sure. Cord crouched back down, scooped another handful of gravel, watched light play in the tiny flecks of gold in his palm. He thought about $7,200. He thought about 28 days. He thought about the boy at Spotsylvania, and the ledger that never below, and the farm in the valley below that worked because 3 women had refused to let it stop working. He stood up. We start digging tomorrow, he said. Dawn. All 4 of us when we can manage it. Shifts when we can't, he looked at the canyon. And we figure the rest out as we go. Ada looked at him from across the creek. Her hand was on her knife. Her eyes were still flat and green, and absolutely unsentimental. You're planning to save us, she said. It wasn't admiration, wasn't gratitude. Just the particular tone of someone identifying what they think is a mistake in progress. No, Cord said. He looked at her steadily. I'm planning to save the farm. You 3 already know how to save yourselves. I'm just… He stopped, found the word. Stay. Ada looked at him, just looked. Then she turned her horse and started back down the canyon without saying anything else. Which was, Cord was beginning to understand, about as close to approval as Ada Voss was likely to offer anyone for a very long time. And right now, with 28 days and $7,200 and a canyon full of maybe. Right now, that was enough. Day 1 of the plan. That's what Cord called it in his head. Not day 8 of being trapped. Not day 1 of probably failing. Day 1 of the plan. Because the way you name a thing is the way you live inside it. And he'd learned that in the war. You don't call it a retreat. You call it a tactical repositioning. You don't call it fear. You call it information your body is giving you about what matters. The plan was simple, which meant it was going to be hard. Cattle, wheat, gold. 3 streams of money running toward one number, $7,200. 28 days. 4 people who barely knew each other, and 1 very tired horse named Reckoning, who had opinions about all of it. Cord sat at the kitchen table before sunrise on day 1. Papers spread in front of him. Numbers written on the back of an old feed receipt, because that was the only paper he could find. coffee going cold at his elbow because he'd forgotten to drink it. He ran the numbers again. Cattle at fair market. Not Harlan's prices. Fair prices. $2,800 if they were lucky. Maybe $2,900 if Fern's assessment of the herd quality was right, and it probably was because Fern's assessments of things tended to be right. Wheat sold early. Green wheat. Not ideal. They'd take a hit on the price. Maybe $900. $1,000 if they found the right buyer. Gold. The canyon. The vein Fern had pointed at with her quiet certainty. If it was as rich as the surface color suggested, if they worked it hard, if nothing went wrong. Maybe $1,500. Maybe $2,000 total. Best case. 67 gap. $500. Best case. Worst case he wasn't going to think about yet. He stared at the numbers. The numbers stared back. He drank the cold coffee. Nessa appeared at 4:47 in the morning. He knew the time because he'd been counting the minutes between the rooster's first crow and whatever came next, which was apparently Nessa Calloway walking into her own kitchen and stopping dead when she saw him at her table, surrounded by papers. She looked at the papers. Then at him. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I slept," he said. "How much?" "Some." Shy crossed to the stove, started building the fire back up from last night's coals. Her movements were economical, no wasted motion. The kind of efficiency that comes from years of doing the same thing in the same space and knowing exactly where every element is. "The numbers don't work," he said. She didn't turn around. "I know, best case. We're still $500 short." "I know. There has to be something we haven't thought of." She was quiet for a moment. Just the sound of the stove and the fire catching, and the creek outside doing its indifferent work. "There might be," she said finally, "but I'm not ready to talk about it yet." He looked at the back of her head. The dark pinned up already, even at 4:47 in the morning, like she'd woken up ready for whatever the day intended to throw at her. "All right," he said. She turned, looked at him over her shoulder. Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe. Or something adjacent to it. "All right," she repeated. "You'll tell me when you're ready," he said. "Until then, we work with what we have." She looked at him a moment longer, then turned back to the stove. And that was that. First week was brutal, not the kind of brutal that breaks you all at once. The slow kind. The kind that files you down a little each day, so gradually you don't notice until you try to straighten your back one morning and discover your back has made other plans. The schedule Cord built went like this. Up before dawn, Cord and Nessa to the canyon, Fern and Ada managing the farm, midday rotation, evening chores together, collapse, repeat, except nothing repeated exactly, because every day had its own particular way of being terrible. Day 3. The primary gold pan cracked down the middle. They had 2 others. Now they had 2 others. Day 4. One of the cattle got through a fence gap and spent 4 hours being retrieved from the upper pasture, which cost Fern and Ada the better part of the afternoon they'd planned to spend cutting wheat. Day 5. The canyon creek rose 2 feet from runoff, upstream, flooded the section they'd been working, turned 3 hours of carefully sorted gravel into a mud mess at the bottom of a pool that hadn't existed the day before. Cord stood in the water up to his thighs looking at the ruined gravel. "Well," he said. "Yes," Nessa said from the bank. "We move upstream." Yes, they moved upstream. The canyon became its own world. Cold water, the smell of wet stone and pine, the rhythmic sound of shovels in gravel and gold pans swirling, and the occasional soft sound Nessa made when she found color. Not quite a word, just a breath, just barely more than nothing. He learned the sound, learned to listen for it, the way you learn to listen for the sounds that matter when you're out in country that can kill you. The crack of a branch that means something heavy. The particular silence that means weather changing. Nessa's almost sound that meant gold. He learned other things too, the way she worked. Clean and efficient and without complaint. Even when the water was so cold, his hands stopped feeling like hands and started living like 2 bad ideas. His wrists. She never complained about the cold. He never heard her complain about anything, which he found himself thinking about more than made sense. Don't do that, not the thought exactly, more like a reflex. The part of him that had been keeping people at the correct distance for 5 years making itself known. She's a partner. That's the word. Partner. Right, partner. He went back to shoveling. By day 4, they'd found a rhythm. Not just in the farmhouse, too. Mornings. Cord made the coffee because he was always up first, and the coffee situation required immediate attention. Fern cooked. Nessa planned. Ada sharpened things. Various things. An impressive variety of things for a person who already had the sharpest knife Cord had ever seen outside of a butcher's shop. He didn't mention this. He wasn't reckless. Meal times were the only time all 4 of them stopped moving at the same time, and meals became, without anyone deciding they would, the time when they learned things about each other, not big things, not confessions or revelations, just the small, ordinary things. Fern had a systematic approach to eating, where she finished each item on her plate completely before moving to the next. Ada ate fast and then watched everyone else eat, like she was gathering information. Nessa cut everything into pieces before she started, even bread, which Cord found inexplicably endearing, and then told himself to stop finding inexplicable. He had a habit of turning his coffee mug a quarter turn between sips. He didn't know he did it until Fern pointed it out on day 3. 90 degrees, she said, every time he looked at his mug. Huh, why? She said. I don't know, he said, hadn't noticed. She nodded, like this was useful information filed away for later reference, which it probably was. Ada said nothing, but she watched him turn the mug a quarter turn. At the next sip, and the corner of her mouth moved in a direction that was not quite a smile, but was in the general vicinity progress. Day 8, evening. Cord was in the barn checking on reckoning. When he heard boots on the packed dirt behind him, he turned Ada Voss, alone. Which was unusual because Ada tended to have the barn as her own territory, and tended to communicate this fact through the particular quality of silence she maintained whenever anyone else was in it. She stopped about 6 feet away, arms crossed, hand on the knife. He waited. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. More. I don't trust you, she said. I know. I want you to know it's not personal. He thought about that. How is it not personal? Because I don't trust anyone, she said. So you're not special, he almost smiled. Kept it off his face. I appreciate the clarity. Don't. Her eyes went flat. I'm not trying to be charming. I'm trying to make sure you understand something before you decide to feel good about the fact that you've been here 8 days and haven't done anything awful. She looked at him steadily. Silas was here for 3 weeks before he did anything that made us wonder. You still have 2 weeks and 6 days of potentially being exactly like him. Cord looked at her. She looked back. Fair. He said, yes, she said. It is. She started to turn, then stopped, her back to him. Her hand dropped from the knife. He asked me to marry him, she said, still. The barn was very still. Silas, not a question. He already knew. He put a ring on my finger, she said, in front of witnesses. In front of Reverend Aldous. A pause. He said, I love you, and he meant it, or he said it in a way that was exactly identical to meaning it, which turns out to be the same thing if you're on the receiving end of it. Cord said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would help, and a lot of things to say that would hurt, and he was not going to say any of those things. The next morning he was gone, Ada said. The ring, too, which I later found out he'd borrowed from a jeweler in Milford under a false name. She was quiet for a moment. I'm telling you this not because I want your sympathy. I don't. I'm telling you because I want you to understand the exact nature of what you're dealing with when you deal with me. She turned back, looked at him. Those flat grease. I'm telling you, she said, so that when I watch you the way I watch you, you know why. And you don't take it as an invitation, Ada, he said. What? I'm not Silas. No, she said. Not yet, he held her gaze. I know you can't take my word for that. No, so I won't ask you to. He turned back to reckoning, started brushing him down again. Long, steady strokes that the horse appreciated and that gave Cord's hands something honest to do. "I'll just keep showing up," he said, "and you keep watching. And at some point you'll either decide I'm not him or you'll decide I am. Either way, you'll be the one who decides." Silence, then Ada's boots on the dirt, moving toward the door, then stopping. "You turn the brush the same direction every time," she said. "You're doing it again. Same as the coffee mug." He looked down at his hand. She was right. "Huh," he said, and Ada Voss, who did not trust anyone, who had not smiled at anything, since Silas Crane put a ring on her finger and took it back in the night, made a sound, brief, involuntary, like a laugh that got out before she could stop it. Xiao was gone before he could look up to confirm it, but it had happened. He was fairly certain it had happened. The drought started on day 9. Not a full drought. The creek didn't disappear. But the water level dropped by a third in 2 days, which meant the main channel of Fern's irrigation system pulled less water than the fields needed, which meant the wheat was getting thirsty at exactly the wrong time in its growth cycle. Fern assessed the situation at dawn on day 9, with the expression of someone who has encountered an equation with an unknop-if-bubble result. "We need to deepen the intake," she said. "The creek bed has a secondary channel about 40 feet upstream. If we redirect," she stopped, drew a quick diagram in the dirt with her finger. "Here and here. We can pull from the deeper flow." Cord looked at the diagram. "How long?" 3 days of work. Maybe 3 or 4 days not at the canyon. He looked at the wheat, at the sky, at the creek. "What happens to the wheat if we don't?" "We lose maybe 30% of the yield," Fern said, "which takes us from $1,000 to $700 on a good day." He looked at the diagram again. "You and me," he said, "starting now. Nessa and Ada cover the canyon and the cattle." Fern nodded, already moving toward the tool shed, which was how Cord Macklin ended up spending 3 days in the mud, beside a woman he'd known for 8 days, doing the kind of work that involves a lot of grunting and not much talking, digging, redirecting, stone by stone remaking the front end of a system Fern had built from nothing. He learned her in those 3 days. Not from what she said, from how she worked. The way she planned 3 moves ahead. The way she'd stop and look at something for 30 seconds before touching it, figuring it out first, because she'd rather think a little longer than do something twice. The way she'd occasionally make a small, satisfied sound when something worked, exactly the way she'd calculated it would. On day 2 of the ditch digging, they took a rest in the afternoon heat, sitting on the bank with their boots off and their feet in the cold creek water. "Your father taught you this," Cord said. "Not all of it. Just the question." "He taught me how things work," Fern said. "Machines. Systems. The logic underneath." She looked at the water moving around her feet. He said, "Everything has a logic. You just have to find it. You have to ask what it's trying to do, and then help it do that better." Cord thought about that. "Even people," she looked at him, "especially people. What's my logic?" She considered him. Seriously, like he'd asked a real question. "Because he had. You're trying to outwork your memory," she said. "You think if you're tired enough you won't have room for whatever it is that follows you around." The creek moved. The afternoon was very warm and very still. "Does it work?" he said. "No," she said. "But neither does running." "I've tried that too." He looked at her. She was looking at the water. "What were you running from?" he said. She was quiet for a long time. Then, "Ohio. A father who died, and a mother who couldn't hold the farm, and a life that was supposed to be one thing and turned into something smaller every year." A pause. Silas offered big. She said it without bitterness. Just the fact of it. "He offered the biggest thing anyone had ever offered me. A real partnership. Something I built that would last." "He knew what you wanted," Cord said. "He'd written it down." "Yes," she said. He had. Cord picked up a stone from the bank, turned it over in his hand. "The thing about Spotsylvania," he said, and then he stopped. Because he almost never started this sentence, and he had no idea why he was starting it now, except that Fern was sitting next to him, with her feet in the cold water, looking at things without judgment. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to." She waited. "There was a boy," he said. 19. Younger than me by 5 years, which felt like a lot at the time. He went down in the mud 20 feet from me. I had maybe 2 seconds to make a choice. He turned the stone over again. I chose wrong. I knew I chose wrong before I'd finished choosing. Fern said nothing. "I've been making the right choice ever since," Cord said. "Every time I get one. Right choice every time. Like if I accumulate enough of them, the ledger comes out even, does it?" Fern said. "No," he said. "But I keep trying anyway." She was quiet then. "Maybe that's your logic." "What?" "Trying anyway," she said. "Even when the math doesn't work. Even when the ledger won't balance." She looked at him. "You kept trying with us. With the farm." When any reasonable man would have taken the $40 in his pocket and gone back to Denver. He looked at the stone in his hand. "The boy's name was Thomas," he said. "I looked it up after the war. Thomas Ellery. From Pennsylvania." Fern was very still. "I've never told anyone that," Cord said. "I know," she said, which was an odd thing to say, except he understood what she meant. Some things, you can tell when they've never been told, because the telling of them is still intact. Still whole. She understood she was holding something fragile. They sat by the creek for a while longer. Then they put their boots back on and went back to digging. Day 13. That's when Harlan Dodd arrived. Not at the end of the 4 weeks. Not close to the deadline. Day 13. 15 days early. Cord was at the canyon with Nessa when they heard the hooves. He didn't know yet who it was. He just heard the number of them. Multiple horses. Moving deliberately. He looked at Nessa. She looked at him. They didn't say anything. They just packed up what they were doing and rode back down to the valley and arrived to find 10 men on horseback in the front yard of the farmhouse. And the largest man Cord had ever seen in the saddle, sitting there like he owned the place, which he believed he did. Harlan Dodd was 55 years old and built like a problem. Big through the shoulders, scarred face. Eyes that did the thing eyes do. When someone has enough damage to people that they've stopped thinking of people as people and started thinking of them as problems to solve. He looked at Cord as Cord and Nessa rode in. "That'd be the new fool," he said to nobody in particular. "That'd be the owner," Cord said. He kept his voice level. He kept his hands where they were, not on his rifle, just on the reins. "Easy. You're Harlan Dodd." "I am." "You're 15 days early. I'm checking on my investment." Cord looked at the 10 men behind Dodd, looking back. Some of them with their hands already near their weapons. Some of them just watching with the particular expression of men who get paid to be present at unpleasant situations. "Your investment isn't ready yet," Cord said. "Come back in 15 days. Dodd smiled. The kind of smile that has no warmth in it whatsoever and is not trying to pretend otherwise. "See, that's not quite how I operate. I like to keep an eye on things. Make sure nothing's being moved around that shouldn't be." He looked at Nessa, then at the barn. Then at the north hills visible above the tree line. "I hear there's a gold deposit up there." Cord felt something cold settle into his chest. "Stay still. Don't show it. Stay still. You hear a lot for a man who lives in Milford," he said. "I hear everything," Dodd said. "That's what money buys, Mr. Macklin, not just land. Information." He looked back at Cord. Silas Crane was very forthcoming, before he left. About everything this property had to offer. Nessa made a sound beside Cord. Small. Quick. Like something had hit her. He didn't look at her. Kept his eyes on Dodd. "You're welcome to camp in the lower pasture," Cord said. "North pasture's ours." "That's very generous," Dodd said. "We'll do that." He started to turn his horse, then stopped, looked back over his shoulder, comfortable, unhurried. "The gold deposit. We've known about it for 2 months. A pause. "We've had men up there working the upper veins since April. The world didn't end, it just got smaller. The easy part's gone," Dodd said pleasantly. "What you've got left up there, if you work it very hard, might get you $500. $600 if you're lucky." He smiled. "Have a nice evening." He rode to the lower pasture. His 10 men followed. Cord sat on reckoning and did not move for a long moment. Nessa was very still beside him. Then she said very quietly, "He's been up there." "Yes." "He took the vein, the primary one." "Yes, which means the plan doesn't work," Cord said. "Not as designed." He heard her breathe. "Once controlled, how short?" she said. "He'd attack them as head. Fast. Dirty. Best case now, without the main vein. Maybe $5. 800 total. Maybe." He paused. "We're short $400. At minimum." She was quiet. He looked at her. Her face was doing the granite thing. The surface holding while something under it made calculations he couldn't quite read. "There might be something," she said. "The thing you weren't ready to talk about." She didn't answer that. She turned her horse toward the house. That night was the worst. Not because of Harlan Dodd's men in the lower pasture, though their fire was visible from the kitchen window like a particularly unpleasant reminder. Not because of the numbers, though the numbers terrible, genuine, because of Ada, who had been holding it together, who had been working, who had been sharpening things and moving fast and making that almost sound in the barn and doing everything right. Ada, who sat down at the kitchen table after dinner and said, "We can't do this." Not loud, not dramatic, just flat. "We can't do this," she said again. "The math doesn't work, and Dodd is in our pasture with 10 men, and the gold is mostly gone, and we have." She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. "We have nothing. We have $40 in Cord's pocket, and a farm that Dodd is going to own in 15 days, Ada." Nessa said, "Don't." Ada looked at her. "Don't say we keep trying, because the math doesn't get better from trying. The math is the math. The math isn't a final yet," Fern said. Quiet, steady. Her voice the same volume it always was. "Fern." "It's not final," Fern said. "We haven't counted everything." Silence. Ada looked at Nessa. Nessa looked at her hands. Cord stood up. He crossed to the door, opened it, stepped outside. Because sometimes 4 people in a small kitchen is 1 person too many, and he was the 1 person who should be outside. He stood on the porch in the dark. Cold now, the kind of cold that comes down from the mountains at night like it's been waiting all day to arrive. Harlan Dodd's fire was a small orange eye in the lower pasture, watching. He looked at the stars. He thought about Thomas Ellery from Pennsylvania. He thought about the ledger that never balanced and the right choices he kept making. And whether this was one of those moments or the other kind. The door opened behind him. Nessa. She came to stand beside him at the railing. Not touching. Just present. They stood in the dark for a while. "The thing I wasn't ready to talk about," she said. He waited. She reached into her pocket, pulled out something small, set it on the railing between them. A pair of earrings. Gold, intricate. The kind of work that takes a craftsman a long time and a craftsman who cares. "My mother's," she said. "The only thing I have left of her." He looked at the earrings. "Didn't touch them." "How much?" he said. Quietly, "The jeweler in Milford offered me $300 2 years ago," she said. "Before I understood what kind of man Silas was. Before I needed money. More than I needed the only thing my mother ever left me." A pause. "I said no. I said I'd never sell them." He said nothing. "I think they might get $350 now," she said. "Maybe 400 if the jeweler's having a good month." 400. Which brought the total to maybe $6,200. Still $1,000 short. He looked at the earrings on the railing. "It won't be enough," he said, not unkindly. "Just the truth, I know," she said. "But it's something I can do, that I can choose to do." A pause. "Everything else has been done to me. This is something I decide." He understood that. He understood it completely. He picked up the earrings. Held them out to her. She looked at him. "Keep them for now," he said. "There might be another way." "There isn't." "There might be," he said. "Give me 2 days to look for one before you sell them." She looked at him in the dark. The light from Dodd's fire was just enough to see her face. Not fully, just the outline of it. The strong jaw. The eyes that were doing the complicated thing. 2 days, she said. 2 days, he said. She took the earrings back. Held them in her fist. They stood in the dark a while longer. "Why are you doing this?" she said. Not the first time she'd asked. Different question this time, smaller. More specific, doing what, trying so hard, she said. For us. For this, her voice was very controlled. You came here for land, for quiet, for nothing and nobody. And instead you got. She gestured at the pasture, at Dodd's fire, at the farmhouse behind them with Ada's voice, still audible through the closed door. This, he thought about it, the honest answer. I spent 5 years running toward nothing, he said, toward empty, toward quiet and alone and safe. He looked at Dodd's fire. Turns out empty isn't what I needed. I just thought it was because it hurt less. She was very still. This hurts more, he said, all of it. The work, the numbers, the worry, you three. He paused. But it's the right kind of hurting, the kind that means something's actually there. She didn't say anything. He looked at her. She was looking at the earrings in her fist. Nessa, she looked up. Keep them, he said. We'll find another way. She held his gaze for a long moment. In the dark, with Dodd's fire watching and the mountains watching, and the creek, doing its indifferent work. Then she put the earrings back in her pocket and went inside. He stood on the porch for a while longer. Long enough for Dodd's fire to burn down a little. Long enough for the stars to move a degree or two in their slow, indifferent arc. Then he went inside too, because tomorrow was day 14. And they had 14 days left. And the math didn't work. But the math had never worked. Not once in his life had the math worked out beforehand. Not at Antietam. Not at Spotsylvania. Not the morning he'd walked away from Virginia with $40 and a rifle and no plan. The math never worked until it did. You just had to keep moving until it did. Days 14 through 20. The canyon yielded less without the main vein. But it yielded. Cord and Ness went up every day, worked the secondary deposits. Smaller color, more patience required, more work per ounce. But real, accumulating. Dodd's men watched. From the pasture. From the edge of the property, visible, deliberate. Designed to make them feel watched, which worked. Which was the point. Cord did not let it change what he did. He got up before dawn. He made coffee. He went to the canyon. He came back. He did the farm work. He ate whatever Fern put in front of him. He did not think about the men in the lower pasture anymore than he had to, which was more than he wanted to, but less than Dodd intended. Ada started coming to the canyon on day 16, not replacing, Nessa adding to. 3 people working. More gravel moved. Cord didn't comment on it, just made room for her in the rhythm of the work. Handed her a pan. She took it day 17, a good day. $60 in gold between sunrise and sunset, the single best day they'd had. At this rate, Ada said, sitting on the bank wringing water from her sleeve. Still short, Cord said. I know. She looked at the pan in her hands. But less short, he agreed. She looked at him. When did you last sleep? Last night how much? He thought about it. Some, she made a sound. Not quite the sound from the barn. Something less amused. You're doing that thing where you run yourself until you break, she said. I've seen Nessa do it. I've done it myself. She looked back at the creek. It doesn't make the math better. It just makes you too tired to notice. He looked at her. This was the most Ada had said to him at one time, since she'd told him about Silas and the ring. I'll sleep more, he said. That's a lie, she said. Probably. He said the corner of her mouth moved. He counted that as a victory and went back to work, day 23. 5 days left. The totals on the back of the feed receipt. Gold, $410 accumulated. Canyon nearly tapped. Cattle, 2,780. Sold to a rancher 2 days east who'd come through on his way to Copperfield. Not full market price, but not Harlan's price either. Wheat, Fern had found a buyer. A provisioner heading to a mining camp north of Milford who needed grain and couldn't wait for full harvest, $870. They'd cut early, lost some yield. It was enough. Total, $4,060. Gap, $3,140. Cord stared at the number. $3,140. He'd been hoping to be at $5,500 by day 23. He was at $4,060. The gap had not shrunk the way the plan required. The gap had a life of its own. The gap was, frankly, winning. He sat at the table at 5 in the morning and did not drink his coffee. The numbers hadn't changed overnight. They never did $4,060. Gap, $3,140. With Nessa's earrings, maybe $4,460. Gap, $2,740. Same numbers. Different morning. Same wall. He closed his eyes. He thought about Fern in the creek with her feet in the cold water saying, maybe that's your logic. And he thought about Thomas Ellery. And he thought about 5 years of right choices, trying to balance a ledger that would not balance. And he thought about 3 women who had built something real out of nothing, while a man took credit for it, and then disappeared. He thought about Harlan Dodd's fire in the lower pasture, Pete Orned. Permanent, waiting, and then, because Cord Macklin was learned to sit with impossible problems until they showed him something, he sat. He sat very still. And the problem showed him something, not a solution. Not yet. Just an angle, a direction. The beginning of a thought that might, if you followed it far enough and were willing to go somewhere uncomfortable, lead somewhere useful. He stood up, went to the door, looked out at the lower pasture where Dodd's fire had burned down to coals in the early morning dark. Harlan Dodd had built this trap over years. Layers of it. The loan documents. The production rights. The Dawn Clause buried in page 7. The stolen information about the gold. A man who built traps this carefully, who knew this much about contracts and clauses, and the spaces between legal and right. That man wasn't born knowing how to do this. That man had learned, which meant that man had once been someone else. Cord stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he went back inside and picked up his coffee and drank it, even though it was cold. Day 23, 5 days left, the math still didn't work. But there was a direction now. And direction, in Cord Macklin's experience, was how you started. Day 6, the morning everything changed. Cord was at the canyon, alone. Because Nessa had stayed at the farm to handle a problem with the cattle fence that couldn't wait. Just him and the creek, and the thin cold air and the sound of the shovel in the gravel. He was thinking about Dodd. He'd been thinking about Dodd for 3 days, not with anger. Anger wasn't useful. With the particular attention he gave to things, he didn't understand yet. The way Dodd had said it. Have a nice evening. Like a man going through a motion he'd gone through, enough times that the pleasure had mostly drained out of it. Like a man who is finishing something, because that's what you do when you start something. Not because finishing it meant anything. He was thinking about this when the section of rock face above him cracked. He didn't hear it before it happened. Just impact, his shoulder first, then his ribs as he went down. Cold water and gravel and the weight of the fallen section pressing him sideways against the creek bank. Not the full face of the cliff, just a section of it. Enough. He came up, coughing, blood in his mouth, could taste it. He sat in the water for a moment, tested everything. Ribs on the left side. 2 of them, maybe. A deep gash along his side where the rock edge had caught him going down. Not bleeding fast, but bleeding. He got himself to the bank, sat there in the cold. Reckoning was at the edge of the canyon watching him with the dignified concern of a horse who had seen his person do various disguisable things over the years. And had opinions, I know, Cord said. He got himself onto the horse, rode back down. Nessa saw him coming across the lower field. She dropped the fence post she was holding. She was running before he'd covered half the distance between them, which was something he registered somewhere in the back of his mind. Through the pain and the blood and the afternoon suddenly gone very bright and unhelpful. She was running. Nessa Calloway, who moved with calculation and economy in all things, was running. Cord. Her hands on Reckoning's bridle, her face coming up to his level. What happened? Rock face, he said. Canyon. I'm all right. You're bleeding, I know. Get off the horse, I can... Get off the horse. Not a request. Not remotely. He got off the horse. She got him inside. Fern appeared. Ada appeared, with the particular speed of someone who has spent her life ready for emergencies. They got him onto the kitchen bench. Fern cut his shirt away from the wound, with the clean efficiency of someone who had done this before. Nessa had water and cloth before Cord had fully processed that he was sitting down. It hurt. He did not say this because it was not new information for anyone in the room. Ada cleaned the gash. Quick and thorough, and not gentle, but not cruel either. Just efficient. Just getting the job done. Nessa stood behind her, not helping. Just there. Just present. 2 ribs, Fern said, pressing along his side with careful fingers. He winced. That's what I thought, cracked. Not broken. Probably. She pressed again. He winced again. You'll breathe carefully for 2 weeks. I'll breathe carefully for 3 days, he said. We have 5 days left. Nessa made a sound. He looked at her. She was standing with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and her eyes doing the complicated thing at maximum intensity. You're not going back to the canyon, she said. Nessa, you are not going back to the canyon, she said again, with cracked ribs. Alone. Where the rock face is actively falling on people. He opened his mouth. She looked at him. He closed it because there was something in her face that he hadn't seen before. Under the granite. Under the control. Something that was very specifically about him, and not about the farm, or the debt, or Harlan Dodd's fire in the lower pasture. Something that was scared. About him, Nessa, he said. Quiet, don't, she said. Also quiet. I scared you. She looked away. I'm all right, he said. I know, she said, still looking away. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. She looked back at him. Her eyes were bright, not wet, not quite, just bright. Stay off the canyon for 2 days, she said. Let it settle. Let you settle. She uncrossed her arms, put one hand on the table beside him, not touching him, just near. 2 days. He looked at her hand, then at her face. 2 days, he said. She nodded once, turned. Said something to Fern about the wound dressing that he didn't follow, because he was still looking at where her hand had been on the table. Ada looked at him from across the room. He looked at her. She didn't say anything. Just looked at him with those flat green eyes that saw everything and filed it away. Then she handed him a mug of coffee, hot, which meant she'd made it before she'd heard about the accident, which meant she'd made it for him. On purpose, he drank it. It was possibly the best coffee he'd ever had. That night, day 26, 4 days left. Cord sat in his room, with his ribs wrapped and his coffee gone, and on the back of the feed $60 gap, $3,140, with Nessa's earrings. Maybe $4,460, gap, $1,740. No more gold worth speaking of. Canyon tapped. Cattle sold. Wheat sold $2,740 they did not have. And Harlan Dodd in the lower pasture, pot, permanent waiting. Cord put the paper down, lay back, stared at the ceiling. And he thought about the direction he'd found on day 23. The angle. The beginning of the thought, a man who builds traps this carefully had once been someone else. Which meant something. He wasn't sure yet exactly what it meant. But he was going to find out. Because day 26 was almost over, and day 27 was coming. And on day 28, Harlan Dodd was going to arrive at the farmhouse with a deed transfer in one hand and a smile that had no warmth in it. Unless something changed first. Something had to change first. Cord Macklin, who had been making right choices for 12 years, trying to balance a ledger that would not balance one, lay in the dark with his cracked ribs and his cold coffee and the numbers that didn't work and the direction he'd found. He followed it into the dark until morning. Day 27, 1 day left. Cord was up before anyone, which was saying something. Because Nessa was usually up before the roosters made their case about it. And Fern was usually up before Nessa. And Ada was usually up before Fern, sitting at the kitchen table in the dark like she'd been there all night, which possibly had been. But Cord was up before all of them. He didn't make coffee. Didn't want the sound of it. Just stood at the kitchen window in the gray pre-dawn and looked at what was left of Harlan Dodd's fire in the lower pasture. Not much, just coals. Just the suggestion of heat where heat had been. He'd followed the direction all night, the angle, the thought. A man who builds traps this carefully had once been someone else. He'd followed it through the dark hours and the cold and the particular silence of a house where three women were sleeping and trusting, which was its own kind of weight to carry. And he'd arrived somewhere, not a solution, something better than a solution, an understanding. He understood Harlan Dodd now, not completely, not the way you understand someone you've known for years, but enough. The way you understand terrain you've studied from a distance, before you have to walk through it, enough to know what to say, if he got the chance, if Dodd gave him the opening, if there were a lot of ifs. But Cord Macklin had been working with ifs his whole life. Nessa appeared at 4:51. She saw him at the window, stopped, looked at him for a moment. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Some," he said. She crossed to the stove, started the fire, the same movements she always made, economical, certain, Cord. "Yes, when Dodd comes tomorrow," she didn't turn around, "whatever happens. Whatever he does, or says, or brings with him." A pause. "I need you to know that this," she stopped. "He waited. This month," she said, "has been the most real month of my life." She was still facing the stove. "Whatever that's worth," he looked at the back of her head, the dark hair, the straight spine, the woman who had never once asked him to save her, who had only ever asked him to stand beside her. "It's worth a lot," he said. She nodded once, didn't turn, and that was enough. For now, that was exactly enough. Fern came down at 5, Ada at 5:15. They ate breakfast. Nobody talked much. The food was good. Fern had made biscuits, which she only did when she understood that people needed something specific and warm and solid. Cord ate 2, Ada ate 3, which was a personal record as far as he'd observed. Today, Cord said. They looked at him. "I need to talk to Dodd today," he said. "Alone. Before tomorrow." Nessa's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because tomorrow he comes with 10 men and a AD transfer and a smile he's used 100 times. Today he's just a man having his morning coffee in our lower pasture." "Has not." "Nessa," she stopped. "I'm not going to do anything reckless," he said. "I'm going to go down there and I'm going to talk to him. That's all. And if he decides talking is over and shooting is more efficient," Ada said. "Then you three will hear it and you'll know," Cord said. Ada looked at him flatly. "That's not reassuring." "No," he said. "But it's honest." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her third biscuit. "Fine," she said, which was as close to blessing as Ada Voss gave anything. He walked down to the lower pasture alone, reckoning, watch out go from the corral fence, with the expression of a horse watching his person do something questionable for the 900th time. The morning was cold, clear. The kind of clear that only happens in mountain country where the air is thin enough to be honest about what it is. The mountains were pink and gold at the peaks, where the sun was touching them. The valley below, still in shadow, beautiful, still beautiful. Even now, he crossed the fence line into the lower pasture. Dodd's camp was simple. A fire ring, bedrolls, 8 horses on a picket line, 2 men already up. They saw Cord coming, and their hands moved toward their guns. And then stopped because he had his hands visible and was walking slow. Harlan Dodd was sitting on a log eating something from a tin plate. He looked up as Cord approached. He did not seem surprised. "Mr. Macklin," he said. "Mr. Dodd," Cord said. He stopped 10 feet away, hands at his sides. "You mind if I sit?" Dodd looked at him, then gestured at the ground across the fire ring. Cord sat. The fire between them was small now, morning fire, just enough to make coffee. One of Dodd's men handed Cord a tin mug without being asked to. Cord took it, drank. It was terrible coffee. But he drank it because accepting the coffee was important and he knew it, and probably Dodd knew it too. They sat in silence for a moment. "You're not here to negotiate," Dodd said. "Not a question, no." Cord said, "I know the numbers, there's nothing to negotiate." "Then what?" Cord looked at the fire. "I want to know something," he said. Dodd waited. "Your wife," Cord said. "And your daughters." The silence changed quality. Dodd's face did something. Fast. There and then gone. Like a door that opened an inch, and then closed. "Who told you?" he said. Very quiet. "Nobody told me," Cord said. "I figured it out how." Cord looked at him steadily. "Quit." Because nobody builds what you've built unless they stopped caring about something a long time ago. And nobody stops caring like that unless they lost something they couldn't get back. He paused. The kind of losing that changes the math on everything. Dodd looked at the fire. Long time. Just looking. 1863, he said. Fever came through Milford. 3 weeks he turned the tin plate in his hands. My youngest went first. She was 4. Then my wife. Then my oldest. He set the plate down. 8 years old. Cord said nothing, because there was nothing to say. I was in Denver, Dodd said. Working a deal. Wasn't there? He looked at his hands. Wasn't there. The fire made a small sound. After that, Dodd said, I found that I didn't have any feelings about people anymore. Just about things. Contracts, numbers, property. A pause. It was cleaner, I know. That feeling, Cord said. Dodd looked at him sharply. Not the same thing, Cord said. I know. But I know what it's like to go looking for something with no people in it. Something clean and empty and far enough away that the things that happened can't follow you. He looked at the mountains. Turns out they follow you anyway. Dodd was very still. I bought this land to be alone, Cord said. Same as you built your business to be empty. Different method. Same reason you're not alone now, Dodd said. No, Cord said. I'm not. Dodd looked at him. Something was happening in his face, behind the scarred exterior. Behind the eyes that had stopped seeing people as people. Something was moving. This won't change the debt, Dodd said. I know, Cord said. The contract is legal and binding, and you are 24 hours from being in default, and I have 10 men and you have 3 women and a horse, Cord said. Dodd stopped and cracked ribs, Cord added. Something happened in Dodd's face then. Something involuntary, gone almost before it arrived. You're telling me this, Dodd said slowly. Why? Because I think you're tired, Cord said. I think you've been doing this for 10 years. And every family you've taken a farm from has made you feel nothing, and that's what you wanted. And now you're so far into nothing that you can't remember what something felt like. He held Dodd's gaze. And I think you came out here 15 days early because somewhere under the nothing you remember what it was to have a home. And you wanted to see one. The fire crackled, a long way away. One of Dodd's men said something to another. Low, not relevant. You think you know me, Dodd said. No, Cord said. But what it feels like to run from something that already happened. And I know it doesn't work. And I know. He stopped, started again. I know that the only thing that's ever helped is finding something worth stopping for. Dodd looked at him. Cord met his eyes. Those women built something, Cord said, with their own hands, from nothing. While a man took credit for it and then disappeared, he kept his voice even. Not pleading, not performing, just the facts, just the truth. And then I showed up. And instead of taking from them, I found out I wanted to build with them. Which surprised me. He paused. Which is the first thing that surprised me in 5 years. Dodd put the tin plate on the ground beside him. He looked at the fire. He looked at his hands. He looked at the farmhouse up the slope. White paint and good bones and smoke, just starting from the chimney, where Fern was already making something for people who needed it. He said nothing. Cord stood up. Tomorrow, Cord said. When you come, whatever you decide, he looked at Dodd steadily. You'll be deciding more than a debt. He handed back the tin mug, walked back up the slope. Didn't look back. Nessa was on the porch when he got there, arms crossed, watching him come up from the lower pasture. Well, she said. Well, he said. Did it work? I don't know, he said. She looked at him. You don't know. I said what needed saying, he said. The rest is up to him. She was quiet for a moment. That's not very reassuring. I've been told that today, he said. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Hoofbeats from the eastern road, not Dodd's men. A single horse slow, and carrying a man who matched it in age and pace. Cord was on the porch when the rider came into the yard. He was up before the rider had fully stopped. Hand near his rifle, habit. Then he saw the collar, white, clerical. On a man so forth of 65, who dismounted with the careful deliberateness of someone whose knees had been filing complaints for years and were not being listened to. "Reverend Aldous," Nessa said from behind Cord. Her voice went strange. Something in it he hadn't heard before. Relief, maybe. Or hope. Or the specific sound of someone seeing someone they didn't expect to see. The old man looked up at them. His face was deeply lined. His eyes were sharp and very blue and entirely awake. "Nessa Calloway," he said. "You look like you've had a month." "I've had a month," she confirmed. He looked at Cord. "And you must be the man who bought Alice Crane's trouble, Cord Macklin," Cord said. "Reverend Elias Aldous." He tied his horse to the porch rail. "Slowly. I've been riding for 2 days. I would very much like to sit down and drink something hot." They got him inside. Fern put coffee in front of him before his coat was off. He drank half of it immediately without speaking. Then he set the mug down and reached into his coat and pulled out a leather packet of papers. He put the packet on the table. "I've been looking into Harlan Dodd for 8 months," he said. "Since the Hendersons lost their farm in the valley east here. Same pattern, same clauses, same dawn provision buried in page 7. He tapped the packet. "I have signed statements from 11 families. All of them. Same trap." Cord looked at the packet. Then at the Reverend. "You brought this why?" Cord said. "Because the circuit judge is in Milford," Reverend Aldous said. "As of yesterday. He'll be there for a week." He looked at Cord steadily. "And because 11 families is evidence of a pattern. And evidence of a pattern is fraud. And fraud voids a contract." The kitchen was very quiet. Cord looked at Nessa. She was looking at the packet of papers like she was afraid to touch it. Fern had gone very still. Ada had appeared in the doorway from the back hall, and her hand was on her knife, but differently than usual. Not defensively. "Like she needed something solid to hold, Reverend," Cord said carefully. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying," Aldous said, "that if Harlan Dodd's lending practices constitute fraud, which 11 consistent cases suggest they do, then his contracts are challengeable." He drank more coffee. "I'm saying that if someone were to ride to Milford today, they could file an emergency complaint with Judge Crail before Dodd arrives tomorrow." "Someone," Cord said. "Someone," Aldous said. They looked at each other. "How long would the filing take?" Cord said. "If you ride now." "If the judge is willing to hear an emergency..." Aldous looked at the window, at the light. "You could be back before dark." Cord stood up. "I need the fastest horse on this property," he said. "That's Copper," Ada said from the doorway. "He's not yours. Can I borrow him?" She looked at him for a long moment, then she said, "He doesn't like strangers. I'll make an introduction," Cord said. Another moment. "Take him," she said. "If he throws you, that's between you and him." Cord rode for Milford like the last 12 years of his life. Depended on it, which, in a way, they did. Copper was fast. Ada had not been exaggerating. The horse had opinions about being ridden by someone who wasn't Ada. Communicated these opinions clearly for first quarter mile, and then apparently decided that the pace they were keeping was interesting enough to override his objections. The road to Milford. 2 hours at a walk, 45 minutes if you asked Copper properly, and held on. Cord asked Copper properly, held on. His ribs made their position on this decision very clear. He held on anyway. Milford was bigger than Blackwater. Not much, but a hotel, a courthouse that was also used as a church on Sundays, a land office, 3 saloons, the usual complement of a frontier town that had decided to stay. He found Judge Ezra Crail eating lunch in the hotel dining room. The judge was 60, heavy, looked like a man who had heard every variety of human foolishness and had made a certain peace with its persistence. He looked up from his food when Cord appeared at his table. Took in the cracked ribs. Cord was obviously guarding the travel dust. The urgency. "Sit," the judge said. Cord sat. He laid out Reverend Aldous' packet on the table beside the judge's lunch. 11 families, 11 statements, 11 versions of the same trap, the dawn clause, the compounding interest, the first rights contract, the deliberate misrepresentation of terms, the judge read. He ate while he read, methodically, finishing each thing on his plate before moving to the next, which reminded Cord of Fern and which he noted as irrelevant and filed away. He read for 12 minutes, Cord counted. Then he set the papers down, wiped his mouth, looked at Cord, Harlan Dodd. He said, "Yes, tomorrow morning, yes. And you have." He looked at the papers. Combined cattle, grain, and gold. Approximately 4,060s. That's the Diz 200. Plus whatever compounding interest Dodd claims accrued. Yes. The judge was quiet for a moment. "The Dawn Clause," he said. "Page 7, Cord said. "Small print. Buried after 3 pages of standard boilerplate. Nobody reads page 7. Dodd knows nobody reads page 7. "That's the point of page 7. The judge looked at him. "You understand that even if I find this constitutes fraudulent practice, I can't simply void the debt. The principle is legitimate. The land was used as collateral, I understand," Cord said. "I'm not asking you to void the debt. I'm asking you to void the penalties, the compounding interest. The Dawn Clause specifically." He held the judge's gaze. "We can pay the principal, $7,200. We can't pay $7,200 plus whatever number Dodd invents using a clause he buried in page 7 to ensure we'd miss it." The judge looked at him for a long moment, then at the papers. Then out the window at the Milford Street, where people were going about the ordinary business of their lives, unknowing. "If I issue a temporary injunction," he said slowly, "suspending enforcement of any penalty clauses in loans showing this pattern, pending investigation of fraud allegations. Then tomorrow Dodd can only collect the principal," said. "Which you have." "Which we almost have," Cord said. The judge looked at him. "Almost 4,060s, Cord said. "Worth a 3,140 short of the principal." The judge set down his fork. "Mr. Macklin," he said. "Yes. You rode 2 hours to ask me to issue an injunction that still leaves you $3,140 short of the debt you owe. Yes. That's not actually a solution to your problem." "No," Cord said. "But it buys us time. And it takes the weapon out of Dodd's hand." He leaned forward. "Right now, he has the penalties. The Dawn Clause, the compounding interest. With those, he can make whatever we bring him irrelevant. He can say we're $2.00 short when we're really $300 short. He can move the goalposts every time we get close." He looked at the judge. "Take the penalties away and the number is fixed. The number we owe is real, and I can find $3,140. I can find it. I just need the number to stop moving." The judge looked at him, looked at the papers, looked at his lunch, which was getting cold. "Reverend Aldous vouches for these statements," the judge said. "He rode 2 days to bring them," Cord said. The judge was quiet for a moment longer. Then he called for his clerk. Cord rode back with a folded document in his coat pocket, and his ribs screaming and copper covering the ground, like he'd been personally offended by the distance and intended to address that. He got back as the sun was hitting the western ridges, orange and gold and long-shadowed. The valley lying in that particular late-day light that makes even difficult places look like somewhere a person might want to stay. He pulled up in the yard. All 3 women were on the porch, Reverend Aldous beside them. They'd been watching the road. Nessa came down the steps before Copper had fully stopped. "Well," she said. He pulled the document from his coat, held it out. She took it, read it. Her eyes moved fast across the page, stopped, went back. "Read again." Then she looked up at him. "He voided the penalties," she said. "Suspended, pending investigation," Cord said. "But effectively, yes. For tomorrow, which means tomorrow Dodd can only collect the principal. $7,200, which we don't have. We have 4,060s, he said, which means we're $3. 140 short of a fixed number that cannot grow overnight." She looked at him, working through it. He could see her working through it. The math person in her, taking it apart and putting it back together. "It's still not enough," she said. "Not yet," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "What are you not telling me?" she said. He dismounted, carefully, because his ribs had filed an injunction of their own at this point, and he wasn't entirely unsympathetic. "I talked to Dodd yesterday morning," he said. I know you talked to Dodd. I told him about his daughters, Cord said. Nessa went very still. I told him he was tired, Cord said. I told him that the only thing that ever helped was finding something worth stopping for. She looked at him. And I don't know, Cord said. But I know he heard it. And I know he's been doing this for 10 years and feeling nothing, and that's not what he wanted. That's just what's left when everything else is gone. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You're gambling everything on the conscience of a man who has spent a decade proving he doesn't have one." "No," Cord said. "I'm gambling on the person he was before he decided not to have one." Nessa looked at him. Then she turned and looked at the lower pasture, Dodd's fire, already lit for the evening. "Patient. Permanent. You're either very wise," she said, "or very stupid." "Probably some of both," he said. She almost smiled, not quite, but almost. Day 28 morning, brim of sunrise. None of them slept much, or pretended to. They were all downstairs before 5. Fern made breakfast that nobody ate much of. Ada sharpened her knife. "Nessa, read the judge's document 3 more times," which did not change what it said. Cord sat with his coffee and turned it a quarter turn, beat sips, and didn't think about Thomas Ellery, because today was not a day for things that weighed on him. Today was a day for what was in front of him. They heard Dodd's camp stirring at sunrise, horses, voices, the sound of men preparing to move. How many, Fern said, at the window. "All 10, Ada said from beside her. Cord stood up, straightened his coat, checked that the judge's document was in his left pocket, checked that the $4,060 in its leather pouch was in his right. 2 things. 2 very different kinds of weight. "We go out together," Nessa said. "Not a question. We go out together," Cord agreed. They walked out, all 4 of them, onto the porch. Into the morning. Harlan Dodd rode in at 8:14 in the morning, 10 men behind him, arranged deliberately, spread out, making the mathematics of the situation visible to anyone who needed a reminder. He pulled up 20 feet from the porch, looked at the 4 of them standing there, looked at Cord specifically. He looked different than he had in the morning in the lower pasture. Not softer, not harder, just different. Like a man who has been somewhere internal overnight and has come back changed in ways he hasn't fully assessed yet. "Mr. Macklin," he said. "Mr. Dodd," Cord said. "You've brought your money, some of it," Cord said. He stepped forward, pulled out the leather pouch, set it on the top porch rail. $4,060. "Every cent we have." Dodd looked at the pouch. "And the rest," he said. Cord pulled out the judge's document, unfolded it, held it out. Dodd didn't take it, just looked. "Judge Crail, in Milford," Cord said. "Temporary injunction. All penalty clauses in loans showing this specific pattern are suspended pending investigation of fraudulent lending practices." He held Dodd's gaze. "Which means today you can collect the principal. $7,200. That's the number. That's the only number." Behind Cord, he heard Ada make a sound. In front of him, Dodd was very still. His 10 men were very still. The morning was very still. "You went to the judge," Dodd said. "Yesterday afternoon," Cord said. "Reverend Aldous had 11 statements. 11 families. All the same trap." He kept his voice steady. "The judge found the pattern persuasive. Something moved through Dodd's face, not anger. Something more complicated. So you've taken my penalties," Dodd said. "The judge suspended them," Cord said. "For now, which still leaves you $3,140 short of what you owe me." "Yes," Cord said. Silence. One of Dodd's men shifted in his saddle. Another looked at the others. The mathematics of 10 guns was still visible, still real. The document didn't change the guns. "You're still short," Dodd said. "Yes," Cord said. "The injunction doesn't make you not short." "No," Cord said. "It just makes the number honest." Dodd looked at him. Something behind his eyes. Something Cord had seen this morning in the lower pasture when he'd talked about the daughters. The door that opened an inch. It was opening more than an inch now. "You came to me yesterday morning," Dodd said. "About my family." "Yes, you weren't trying to soften me." "No," Cord said. I was being honest with you because I thought you deserved honesty more than you deserved another person trying to handle you. Dodd was quiet. I've been doing this, Dodd said slowly. For 10 years, I know. 11 families, it turns out. Plus this one, Cord said. Plus this one, Dodd agreed. He looked at the pouch on the porch rail. He looked at the farmhouse, at the barn, at the fields that showed the careful work of people who cared, at the irrigation channels visible in the early morning light, at the wheat that was going to be fine, at the cattle in the upper pasture, at all of it. Everything 3 women had built while a man took credit and then left. He looked at Cord. You reminded me of something this morning, he said. What? Cord said. Who I was, Dodd said. Before I decided to be this instead, he was quiet for a moment. My wife's name was Clara. My daughters were Ruth and Bea. He said the names carefully, like they were something he was taking out, and looking at that he hadn't taken out in a long time. Ruth was 4 when she died. Bea was 8. He looked at his hands on the reins. I was in Denver working a deal. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed much. I came home to an empty house, Dodd said. And I made a decision. He looked at Cord. I decided that if the world could take everything from me, I would take everything from the world. Fair trade. A pause. It wasn't fair trade. I understand that. But it was what I had. Cord said nothing, because Dodd wasn't finished. 11 families, Dodd said again, like he was counting something. Like he was putting a number to something that had been without a number for too long. 11 homes. And I felt nothing. Not pride. Not guilt. Nothing. He looked at the farmhouse. I came out here 15 days early because I wanted to see one. A home. Something real. His voice was very flat. I'd forgotten what they looked like from the inside. The morning held its breath. The debt is forgiven, Harlan Dodd said. One of his men said something sharp and fast. Dodd raised one hand and the man stopped. The debt is forgiven, Dodd said again. Louder, all of it. The land is yours. Clear title. He looked at Cord. I'll send written notice to the land office in Milford by end of week. Behind Cord, he heard Nessa make a sound, small, like something under pressure releasing all at once. He heard Ada. Behind him, a breath sharp, like something breaking open that had been sealed a long time. He heard Fern say something very quiet that might have been a prayer and might have been arithmetic. And with Fern could have been both. Cord looked at Dodd. Why? He said. Dodd looked at him. Because you're right. I'm tired. He gathered his reins. And because Ruth was 4 years old and she deserved better than a father, who spent 10 years afterward proving that nothing matters. He looked at the mountains. I'm going to Milford. I'm going to go find Judge Crail. And I'm going to tell him everything. A pause. All 11 families? That'll mean consequences, Cord said. Yes, Dodd said. It will. He looked at Cord one last time. You remind me of who I was, he said. Before I decided to be something else once. He turned his horse. Don't waste it, he rode. 10 followed. Confused. Uncertain. But followed because Harlan Dodd had said go. And that was enough for them even when they didn't understand why. The sound of hooves faded down the eastern road. And then, quiet, just the creek. Just the wind in the pines. Just the mountains doing their patient work of being there. Cord stood on the porch steps and did not move for a long moment. Then Nessa's hand. On his arm, he turned. She was standing right behind him, closer than she'd ever stood. Her eyes were bright. Really bright. Not trying to hold it back anymore. Just bright. He left, she said. He left, Cord said. It's ours, she said, like she didn't quite believe it. Like the word needed saying out loud before it would become real. It's yours, he said. It was always yours. You built it. She looked at him. Then Fern was there. And Ada. All 3 of them. And Cord in the middle of them. And the morning all around them, and the mountains behind, and the farm in front, and the trap gone. Nothing left except what they'd built. Which was enough. Which was more than enough. That afternoon, Cord did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He sat down, not because he had to, not because he was planning something, not because there was work that needed doing while sitting, just sat on the porch. in the afternoon sun, with a coffee that stayed hot this time because he was actually drinking it. Watching the valley in the particular way of someone who has stopped looking for exits and started looking at what's actually there. Reckoning was in the corral, doing what horses do when they've decided a place is good enough to stay. Fern was in the field with a notebook, making calculations about the next growing season. That probable involved things Cord wouldn't fully understand but would trust completely. Ada was somewhere in the barn. He could hear the sound of her working. It was a different sound than usual, lighter. Not the controlled efficiency of someone maintaining a state of readiness. The sound of someone who has put something down. Nessa came out and sat beside him on the porch steps. Not in the chair, on the steps. Right there, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her arm without reaching much. Neither of them said anything for a while. The afternoon was warm. Real warmth. The kind that gets into your bones and reminds them what summer is for. Reverend Aldous is staying for dinner, Nessa said. Good, Cord said. He's going to want to talk about everything that happened, she said. Probably. Are you ready for that? He thought about it. I've been telling people things recently, he said. More than I have in a long time. He looked at the valley. Turns out it doesn't kill you. She looked at him, sideways, astounding discovery. I'm a slow learner in some areas, he said. She laughed, small, real, the kind she didn't plan and couldn't take back. He decided that was the best sound he'd heard in 28 days. Cord, she said. Yes, the companionship clause, she said. In Silas's contract, he looked at her. I burned it this morning, she said. While you were riding to Milford, I burned the whole thing. He remembered the moment he'd planned for this. The words he'd thought about, the gesture of taking the contract and throwing it into the fire and saying something that would close the chapter properly. Nessa had beaten him to it, which seemed exactly right. Good, he said. So there's no contract, she said. No. Which means no obligation. No, which means if you stay, she said, it's because you choose to, not because a piece of paper says so. He looked at her. I know. And if any of us, she stopped, started again. If what's happened between us, between you and all of us, if that becomes something, it becomes something because we choose it, every day. Not because Silas arranged it. Yes, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I choose it, she said. For the record, he looked at her. This woman who had rebuilt after losing everything, and then rebuilt again when someone took that too, who had never once asked to be rescued, who had asked only for someone to stand beside her. So do I, he said. For the record, she looked out at the valley. He looked at the valley too. They sat in the afternoon sun, comfortable, quiet. The kind of quiet that's full instead of empty. After a while, Ada's voice from the barn, calling something to Fern in the field. Fern's response, the normal sounds of a home in the afternoon. Reverend Aldous appeared in the doorway behind them, a mug in each hand. He stepped between them carefully and settled into the porch chair with the deliberateness of a man whose knees have opinions and has learned to negotiate with them. Lovely afternoon, he said. It is, Cord said. Remarkable, actually, Aldous said, given what the morning was. Mornings change. Nessa, said Aldous, looked at her. Then at Cord, the sharp blue eyes taking in the particular arrangement of them on the steps, the proximity. The ease, yes, he said. They do. He drank his coffee. Harlan Dodd rode through Milford 2 hours ago, according to my sources, which are the people who run the hotel. He paused. He went directly to the courthouse. Judge Crail's office, he said he would, Cord said. He did, Aldous confirmed. He's confessing to everything. All 11 cases. He's prepared to provide restitution from his personal holdings. A pause. It won't cover everything, but it's substantial. Nessa was very still. The 11 families, she said, will hear from a lawyer in Milford within the month, Aldous said, starting with what Dodd can immediately provide. Cord thought about a man riding toward a courthouse, toward consequences he had built for himself over 10 years, toward Ruth, who was 4, and Bea, who was 8, And Clara, whose name he'd said carefully, like something precious, even now choosing to be someone different one day. One choice, that was all it ever was. Good, Cord said, and meant it completely. Dinner that night was the loudest meal Cord had ever witnessed in that kitchen. Not loud, the way fighting is loud, loud the way release is loud. Reverend Aldous, who turned out to have strong opinions about the correct way to make gravy. In extended disagreement with Fern, who had correct opinions about everything and the data to support them. Ada contributing to this debate with the particular energy of someone who has decided, somewhere during the course of the day, that she is going to be present in a room with people. Nessa laughing, actually laughing. The sound of it filling the kitchen like something had been let in through a window. Cord sat at auditorium and ate the excellent food, and drank the excellent coffee, and turned his mug a quarter turn between sips, and thought, This is what I rode 3 days to find, not the land. This after dinner, Reverend Aldous told them about the 9 names in Silas Crane's papers. Not all 9 stories, just the common thread. Women who had trusted. Women who had been turned into strategy notes by a man who had made a system out of their longing for something real. He'll be found, Aldous said. Men like Silas always surface eventually. The pattern is too consistent. Someone will connect the cases. He's already been connected, Fern said quietly. If Dodd is confessing, he'll tell the judge about Silas's involvement, about selling information, about the contract structure. That's aiding a fraud, Cord said. Yes, Fern said, which means there's a warrant coming, Cord said. Fern said. Ada was looking at her knife on the table, not holding it, just looking at it. Then she looked up, at the room, at all of them. He put a ring on my finger, she said. Not loudly, just said it. Into the room, and I thought it was real, and I've been angry at myself for thinking it was real for 8 months. She looked at her hands, but it felt real. It was designed to feel real, and there's a difference between being stupid and being deceived by someone who has practiced deceiving. Nobody said anything, because what she'd said was true and complete and didn't need anything added to it. There is a difference, Reverend Aldous said, finally. A significant one. Ada nodded, once. Sharp. Then she picked up her knife and put it back in her belt, and reached for the biscuit basket, and handed it to Cord without being asked. Which what? Cord understood, the Ada Voss equivalent of a standing ovation, later. Much later, Fern and Ada had gone to bed. Reverend Aldous was in the guest room, which meant Cord was in the barn, which suited reckoning and suited him. He lay in the clean hay with his ribs wrapped and his eyes open. Not think about the numbers. The numbers were done. Not think about the plan. The plan had run its course, just listening to reckoning breathe. That was enough. For the first time in a long time, that was enough. He thought about Thomas Ellery. He always did. Every night, some version of that mud, that moment, that 2 seconds where he chose wrong. But tonight it sat differently. Not lighter. Not gone, just carried differently. Like something you've been holding at arm's length. For so long your arms have forgotten what it feels like to hold it close, and then one day you stop fighting it. You just hold it. The ledger wasn't going to balance. He understood that now in a way he hadn't before. He understood that now in a way he hadn't understood it before. Not because of today. Not because Dodd had ridden away or the farm was saved, or Nessa had said, I choose it for the record. But because of Fern in the creek saying, maybe that's your logic. Because of Ada handing him the biscuit basket. Because of the sound of Nessa laughing in the kitchen. The ledger wasn't going to balance, but you could stop trying to balance it and start building something new. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. You stopped running from the loss and started building toward something worth protecting. He looked at the barn ceiling. Reckoning breathed quietly in his stall. The night was cold and clear and full of stars that didn't know or care about debts or wars or boys in the mud at Spotsylvania. They were just there, patient, permanent, the way mountains are, the way water is. The way the things that last are. Cord closed his eyes and slept deeply, without artillery in his ears, for the first time. In 12 years, 18 months is a long time, long enough to plant 2 harvests. Long enough to learn the way a valley sounds in every season. Long enough for a home to stop feeling like something you're borrowing and start feeling like something you built. Spring. The valley in that particular green that only happens once a year and only lasts 3 weeks. And is worth everything you did to get here. Cord was on the porch with a coffee that had gone cold because he'd forgotten to drink it, again. Some things don't change. Down in the field, Nessa and Fern were plant beans. Working in the easy rhythm, people who have done a thing together many times and have found the places where they fit. Nessa doing the rows, Fern doing the spacing, each trusting the other completely, no words needed. In the corral, Ada was working a young horse, a bay colt they'd acquired in October. Difficult, opinionated. Ada's favorite kind. She moved around him with the same quality she brought to everything, unhurried. Certain. Not forcing anything. Just making being good easier than being difficult, until the colt decided on his own that this was the better arrangement. Cord watched this and thought, there she is, teaching something to trust again. By not asking for it before it was ready. From inside the house, a sound, small, specific, the sound of a child who has discovered that a tin pot makes an excellent drum when struck with a wooden spoon. Wren, 8 months old. Dark hair like Nessa. Eyes that couldn't decide yet what color they were going to be, changing between Cord's brown and something that was all her own. A person in the process of becoming a person. Already opinionated about it. Already taking up exactly as much space as she needed. The drumming intensified, then stopped then. Laughter. Small and total and absolutely not sorry about any of it. Cord stood up. Went inside. Found Wren sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by every pot Fern owned, which were now arranged in what Wren apparently considered an optimal configuration. She looked up at Cord when he appeared. He looked at her. She looked at him. Then she picked up the wooden spoon and offered it to him seriously. Person. Like a person offers someone a position of responsibility. He crouched down, took the spoon, looked at the pots. Which one, he said. She pointed at the largest one. Decisively, he struck it once. She approved. Loudly, he heard Nessa's boots on the porch steps. Then the door. Then she appeared in the kitchen doorway and took in the scene. Her daughter. Her pots, Cord Macklin, who had ridden 3 days to find solitude and instead found this. Looking not remotely sorry about any of it. Don't encourage her, Nessa said. She's going to figure it out regardless, Cord said. Might as well enjoy it. Nessa leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. The posture she used, when she was trying to look like something, wasn't making her feel a particular way. It wasn't working. He could see it from here. There was a letter, she said. From Milford? From Reverend Aldous. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled it out. Silas Crane was arrested in Arizona Territory last month. 2 of the women from his list made statements. It was enough. Cord looked at her. It's done, she said, simply. Wren drummed enthusiastically on the large pot. It's done, Cord agreed. Ness pushed off the doorframe. Crossed to where he was crouching on the kitchen floor. She stood there for a moment, looking at him, looking at Wren, looking at the pots arranged in their optimal configuration. Then she sat down beside him, right there on the kitchen floor, which was so unlike Nessa Calloway's, that, for a moment, he just looked at her. She picked up a smaller wooden spoon from the scattered utensils, tried the medium pot. Wren assessed this performance critically, then nodded. Granted, the 3 of them sat on the kitchen floor in the morning light, making an excellent amount of noise. Outside, the valley was green and real and theirs. The creek did its patient work. The mountains did theirs. And Cord Macklin, who had ridden 3 days looking for silence and solitude, and the clean, empty peace of being alone, turned his coffee mug a quarter turn. And not because a contract said so, not because the math had worked out, not because it was the plan. because it was the choice. Every morning, the choice, the best one he'd ever made.